I walked past my son's room and saw untraceable poisons on his laptop screen. My hands went cold. That night at dinner, he insisted I try his special soup. I smiled, switched our bowls when he wasn't looking, and watched him take the first sip. Then he froze. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The exhaustion from my double shift was a physical weight, but the quiet of the house was a greater burden. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, the clatter too loud in the silence. My son's door at the end of the hallway was slightly open, a wedge of blue light cutting across the dark carpet. I moved toward it, thinking only of telling him I was home, of perhaps hearing about his day. I stopped at the threshold. He was at his desk, his back to me, illuminated by the glow of his laptop screen. The rapid click-clack of his typing was aggressive, focused. I saw the tense line of his shoulders, the forward lean of his body. This was not the posture of someone browsing social media or finishing a school assignment. This was intent. I took a half-step closer, my silent stocking feet on the floor. The search bar at the top of his screen was stark white against the dark background. The words typed there were clear, black, and final. Untraceable poisons, fast-acting symptoms like heart attack. My breath stopped. The air in the hallway turned thick and cold. The framed photo on the wall next to me, Marcus at 12, grinning with a missing front tooth, his arm around my waist, seemed to tilt. I registered the sound of the furnace kicking on downstairs, the familiar hum now menacing. I watched his cursor hover, then click on a link titled, "The Quiet Exit, a Guide." I backed away. One careful step, then another. My hand found the wall for support. I retreated to the living room and stood in the dark, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The cozy room I had furnished with care, the soft sofa, the shelves of books, the rug my husband had chosen, felt like a staged set, a prop in a play where I was the intended victim. My mind began to work with a terrible, cold clarity. It replayed the last few weeks with a new lens, his unusual solicitousness. "You work too hard, Mom. Let me make you tea." His specific questions, asked over dinner just 3 nights prior. "So, Dad's life insurance and the house, it's all just to me, right? I mean, you never changed the will?" I had taken it for a young man's financial anxiety, his impatience to start his life. I had patted his hand and said, "It's all set, Marcus. Everything comes to you." I had seen relief in his eyes. I had mistaken it for comfort. Now I saw it for what it was. Impatience, yes. Greed, absolutely. But underscored by a calculation that froze the blood in my veins. I heard his chair roll back. I moved quickly, silently into the kitchen, I opened the refrigerator, the light blinding, and pretended to look for something. He appeared in the doorway. "Hey, Mom, I didn't hear you come in." His voice was normal, the same voice that had called for me in the night after a bad dream. I turned, holding a carton of orange juice I did not want. I made myself look at his handsome face so like his father's. I searched for a sign of the monster, but I saw only my son. The dissonance was a physical pain. "Long day," I said. My own voice sounded distant but steady. A lifetime of maintaining composure at the hospital served me now. "You been busy?" He shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Just some research. Job stuff." Job stuff. A lie so casual it stole my breath again. "Anything promising?" I asked, returning the juice to the shelf. "Maybe. We'll see." He smiled. It was his easy smile, the one that used to make my heart swell. Now it made me want to scream. "I'm thinking of making soup tomorrow. Something special. You'll be home for dinner, right?" There it was. The invitation. The timeline. "I should be," I said. I closed the refrigerator door, plunging the room into softer light. "Special soup sounds nice." "Good," he said, his eyes holding mine. They were warm. They were dead. You deserve a good meal. I'll take care of it." He pushed off the doorframe and went back to his room, closing the door this time. The click of the latch was definitive. I stood at the kitchen island, my palms flat on the cool granite. The remains of our last meal together were still in the drying rack. 2 plates, 2 glasses. A simple domestic scene. I looked at the block of knives on the counter. I looked at the back door, a straight shot to the garage, to my car, to escape. But flight was not my first instinct. My first instinct was understanding. He was not a stranger who had broken in. He was my child. He knew my routines, my trust, my love for him. He had weaponized them. To run would be to cede the battlefield of my own home, to live in fear. He would find me, or he would inherit everything by default if I simply disappeared. And beneath the terror, a deeper, more devastating emotion began to rise. It was not hot anger. It was a cold, expanding void, a grief for the boy I had raised, who was gone, a grief for the future I had imagined, now ashes. This coldness was useful. It pushed the panic down and let the clinical part of my mind, the administrator who solved problems, take the lead. He had asked about untraceable poisons. He had asked about symptoms that mimic a heart attack. He was planning to use my age, my stress, my history of grief as a cover story. He would be the concerned son, the sole heir, the tragic young man who had lost both parents. It was elegant in its cruelty. I would be home for dinner tomorrow. I would eat his special soup. He would watch me closely. He would expect fear or trust or frailty. He would not expect me to have seen the blueprint of my own murder on his computer screen. He would not expect a mother's observation to turn into a survivor's strategy. The battlefield was set. It was my dining room. The weapons were bowls and spoons and trust. I went to my bedroom and closed the door. I did not cry. I sat on the edge of the bed and thought. I thought about dosage and timing and opportunity. I thought about the will and the police and what constituted self-defense. I thought about the fact that the person I loved most in the world was now the greatest threat to my existence. Sleep was impossible. The night stretched before me, long and dark. I replayed every moment of his 22 years, looking for the crack I had missed. Had it always been there? Was it my fault? The questions were useless. The only relevant fact was, on that screen, he had researched how to kill me. Tomorrow he would try, and so I would have to be ready. The glitch in the picture of our life had been revealed. Everything was different now. The house was not a home. It was a crime scene waiting to happen, and I was no longer just a mother. I was the only one who knew the crime was coming. That knowledge was my only advantage. I intended to use it. The first light of dawn found me in the same position, still dressed from my shift. I had not slept. The night was a long, flat stretch of mental preparation. I had examined the problem from every angle, like reviewing a complex patient file. The emotional shock had settled into a cold, dense mass in my chest. It was a thing I could work around. I stood, my joints stiff. Routine was necessary. I showered, dressed in my professional clothes, a navy pantsuit, a white blouse, armor for the outside world. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen. The silence was different now. It was no longer empty. It was charged, like the stillness before a storm. Marcus's door was still closed. I left for work at my usual time. The drive to the hospital was automatic. I performed my duties as the director of patient admissions with mechanical precision. I reviewed charts, attended a budget meeting, spoke with nurses. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. I was a container, holding a turmoil that no one could see. My mind, however, was in my kitchen. It was tracing steps. He would need to acquire the substance. He would need to prepare the food. He would need to ensure I was the only one who ate it. I considered his options. It would have to be something added at the last moment, something he could control completely, a garnish, a seasoning, the special part of the soup. During my lunch break, I did not eat. I used the computer in my office. My searches were careful, clinical. I looked up toxicology reports, symptoms of specific cardiac glycosides, timelines for medical intervention. I was not learning how to do it. I was learning how to recognize it and what would happen after. Knowledge was my countermeasure. I left work exactly on time. The normalcy of it felt absurd. I stopped at the grocery store, as I sometimes did on Tuesdays. I bought vegetables, chicken broth, a fresh loaf of bread. I selected the items with care, as if for a real meal. The performance had already begun. When I returned home, Marcus was in the living room watching television. He looked up and smiled. "Long day, Mom." "The usual," I said, carrying the bags to the kitchen. "Yours?" "Pretty good." He followed me, leaning against the counter as I began unpacking. "So I'm still on for that soup tonight. I found a great recipe online." "I'm looking forward to it," I said, placing celery on the cutting board. My voice was even. I did not look at him directly, but I watched his reflection in the dark window over the sink. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes tracked my movements. "Need any help?" he asked. "I can manage. You cooked last week. It's my turn." This was our pattern, a gentle back and forth of domestic responsibility. Now every word was a line in a script. "Okay, I'll let you work your magic." He pushed off the counter and left the room. I began chopping onions. The action was rhythmic, mindless. The sharp scent filled the air, and my eyes watered. It was a convenient cover for any expression on my face. As my knife moved, memories intruded, not as flashes of emotion, but as stark, factual images. I saw a smaller Marcus, maybe 7, standing on a step stool at this very counter, his small hands clumsy as he stirred cookie batter. Flour dusted his cheeks. He had looked up at me, his smile gapped with missing teeth. "Is it good, Mommy?" The memory was clear, specific. It was data. It was proof of a former reality that no longer applied. I added the onions to a pot with oil. The sizzle was loud. Another memory, Marcus at 15 slamming his bedroom door after an argument about grades. His voice cracking with anger. "You don't understand anything. You just want to control me." I had stood right here, waiting for the storm to pass, believing it was a phase. Perhaps that was the first crack. Not the anger, but the specific accusation that I was an obstacle. I added chopped carrots and celery to the pot. I poured in the broth. The steam rose, clouding the window. I saw my husband, David, standing at the stove, tasting a sauce. He winked at me. "A little more pepper, don't you think?" He had been the peacemaker, the bridge between my practicality and Marcus's volatility. His death from a sudden aneurysm 2 years ago had removed that buffer. It had also unlocked his life insurance and clarified the will. Marcus was the sole beneficiary. I was the trustee until he turned 25, a detail he had recently come to resent. The money was in a managed account, accessible for his education and living expenses, but the bulk was locked. The house was in my name, with the provision it would transfer to him. I was the living obstacle to his full inheritance. The soup simmered. I stirred it. The action was peaceful, mundane. It was the opposite of what was happening in my house, in my life. I set the table. 2 places. I always set 2 places. For a year after David died, I had set 3 out of habit, then quickly put the 3rd setting away. The emptiness of the 3rd chair had been a presence. Tonight, it was just a chair. The ghost was no longer David. The ghost was the son I thought I had. Marcus came in as I was ladling the soup into 2 plain white bowls. He carried a small bowl of chopped green herbs. "My special touch," he said, placing it on the table between the 2 settings. "Fresh parsley. Really brightens it up." "It smells wonderful," I said. I carried the bowls to the table. They were identical. Steam curled from the surface. We sat down. The overhead light was bright, clinical. I picked up my spoon. He did not. He was watching me. "Aren't you going to try the parsley?" he asked. His tone was light, encouraging. "Of course," I said. I reached for the small bowl. I took a pinch of the chopped green leaves and sprinkled them over my soup. I stirred them in. "What kind is it? It looks different from the usual." "Just a fancy variety I found," he said, his eyes fixed on my bowl. "Flat leaf, more flavor." I nodded. I lifted a spoonful to my mouth. I blew on it gently. I could feel his gaze like a physical pressure. I placed the spoon in my mouth. The soup was warm, savory. I swallowed. "It's very good, Marcus. Thank you." He smiled then, a wide, genuine-looking smile of relief. "I'm glad you like it." He finally picked up his own spoon. He did not reach for the parsley bowl. He began to eat his soup, plain. We ate in silence for a minute. The only sounds were the clink of spoons on ceramic. The soup tasted like ashes in my mouth, but I ate it. I had to. The parsley in my bowl was likely just parsley. The poison, if it was here, was in that small bowl between us. He had waited for me to take it first. He had watched me incorporate it into my meal. He would not touch it himself. This was the confirmation, the final horrible piece of data. The special ingredient was not in the soup pot. It was in that innocent-looking garnish. He had served me the vehicle and then presented the weapon separately, ensuring only my portion was contaminated. I continued to eat. I made a comment about the weather. He responded. The conversation was banal. Inside, my mind was utterly still. The planning phase was over. The confrontation was set. All that remained was the execution, and my response. When the meal was finished, he insisted on cleaning up. "You cooked, I'll clean, it's only fair." He was almost cheerful as he cleared the table. He took the small bowl of parsley and, without a second glance, emptied its contents into the disposal and turned it on. The grinding sound was final. The evidence was gone. I thanked him for dinner and went to my room. I closed the door. I did not vomit, though I wanted to. I stood very still, waiting for any cramp, any odd taste, any sign. There was none. The parsley had been clean. It was a test, a rehearsal. He had wanted to see if I was suspicious, if I would refuse. I had passed his test. The real performance would be tomorrow. He had confirmed my compliance. Now he would prepare the actual poison. I had one more night to finalize my own plans. The ghosts of the past had filled the kitchen, but they offered no comfort. They only highlighted the magnitude of the betrayal. The love that once filled those memories had been converted into fuel. It burned cold and clean, and it would keep me alert. It would keep me alive. I went through the motions of Wednesday with a detached precision. My work at the hospital required a specific kind of attention, a focus on external problems that allowed me to compartmentalize the internal ones. I approved staffing schedules, resolved a billing discrepancy, and attended a lecture on new admission protocols. The normalcy of it was a bizarre counterpoint to the reality waiting at home. I was a woman marking time before a battle. I left on time. The drive home felt both too short and impossibly long. As I turned onto our street, I observed the house. It looked the same: neat lawn, trimmed hedges, the porch light I had put on a timer already glowing in the gathering dusk. A picture of suburban stability. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, my hands on the steering wheel. I took 3 deliberate breaths, emptying my mind of the hospital and filling it with the necessary focus. I was not coming home to my son. I was entering a controlled environment where a threat was active. The scent hit me as soon as I opened the front door. Garlic, onion, thyme. The familiar, comforting aroma of a soup simmering. It was the same smell as yesterday, but today it felt cloying, a perfume trap. Marcus emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His smile was broad, welcoming. Perfect timing. It's just about ready. "It smells wonderful," I said, hanging my coat. My voice was pleasant, normal. I walked into the kitchen. The pot was on the stove, bubbling gently. The table was set exactly as before. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, 2 glasses of water, and between them, a small ramekin filled with a finely chopped green herb. It looked like parsley, but a shade darker. "I used the rest of that special herb," he said, following my gaze. "It really makes the flavor pop. You'll see." "I'm sure I will," I replied. I moved to the sink to wash my hands, a habitual gesture. I needed to observe the space. My eyes tracked the room. The large chef's knife was in its block. The back door was locked. The window over the sink reflected his movements behind me. He was ladling the soup into the 2 bowls, his actions careful, deliberate. "Why don't you sit down?" he said, his back to me. "I'll bring it over." I took my seat. He carried the bowls to the table, placing one before me, then the other at his own spot. The steam rose in identical curls. The soup looked identical, a creamy chicken and vegetable broth. He returned to the counter and picked up the small ramekin of green flakes. He placed it directly to the right of my bowl, a deliberate positioning. "There you go, the finishing touch." He sat down across from me. He did not have a similar ramekin at his place. The message was clear, just as it had been during the test. The poison was isolated. He would watch me add it to my own meal. I looked from the ramekin to his face. He was watching me, his expression one of eager anticipation. It was the look he used to have when he was a boy presenting a homemade gift. "Aren't you going to try it?" he prompted. "It looks very fresh," I said. "Only the best for you, Mom." I reached for the ramekin. My fingers were steady. I took a pinch of the green flakes between my thumb and forefinger. They were dry, finely cut. I held them over my bowl. I could feel his intense focus. I sprinkled them evenly across the surface of my soup. I took my spoon and stirred slowly, incorporating the herb throughout the broth. "Looks good," he said. His shoulders relaxed minutely. He picked up his own spoon and began to eat his unadulterated soup. The base came out really well, I think. I lifted my spoon. I filled it with broth, a piece of carrot, flecks of the green herb clinging to it. I raised it to my lips. I could feel the weight of his stare. I opened my mouth and took the spoon in. I swallowed. The flavor was robust, savory. There was a slight bitterness underneath, a subtle, unpleasant note that had not been there yesterday. It was faint, masked by the thyme and pepper, but it was present, a chemical aftertaste. My stomach clenched, but my face remained placid. "It's delicious, Marcus," I said. "You've outdone yourself." His smile widened. "I told you it was special." He took another hearty bite of his own soup. "So, how was work? Anything interesting?" We began to talk. It was a surreal parody of our old dinners. He asked about my day with what seemed like genuine interest. He talked about a job lead he was pursuing, a position in another state. "The money's really good," he said. "Great starting salary, enough to get my own place finally, be independent." "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," I said, taking another spoonful of my soup. Each swallow was an act of will. The bitter note persisted. "When would you start?" "Soon, hopefully. They want someone immediately. I'd have to move quickly." So he looked at me, his eyes softening with a manufactured sadness. "I'd hate to leave you alone in this big house, though." "We'd manage," I said softly. "A mother always wants her child to fly." He nodded, looking down at his bowl. "I know you do, and you've done so much for me. Really, all the sacrifices." His voice was thick with false emotion. "After Dad died, you held everything together. I don't know how you did it." This was part of the script, I realized, the sentimental lead-up. He was painting the picture of the devoted, grieving son, setting the stage for the tragic, sudden loss of his overworked mother. He was preparing his own alibi, even now in conversation with his intended victim. "We held it together," I corrected him gently, "as a family." He reached across the table and patted my hand. His skin was warm, dry. The touch sent a jolt of revulsion through me. "You're the best, Mom, the absolute best." He withdrew his hand and took another bite. I continued to eat my soup. I finished the entire bowl. I needed him to see that I had consumed it all, that I trusted him completely. When I laid my spoon down, the bowl was empty except for a few traces of broth and the faint green residue. "All done?" he asked, his eyes bright. "All done. It was very filling." "Good." He stood and began clearing the table. He took my bowl first. He picked up the ramekin. It was still half full of the green flakes. "I'll just save this for next time," he said casually, carrying it to the counter. He did not put it in the refrigerator. He left it by the sink. He began washing the dishes. I remained seated, watching him. The performance was nearly complete. I had eaten the poisoned soup. In his mind, the deed was done. All that was left was to wait for the symptoms to begin. He would call 911, play the distraught son, and tell them about his mother's history of stress and high blood pressure. He would mention she'd complained of chest pains after dinner. I felt a cold certainty settle over me. The confirmation was absolute. The special herb had not been parsley. The bitterness was the taste of his betrayal, made literal. My own son had just fed me a lethal substance and was now washing the dish from which he had served it. The grief was a vast, silent hollow inside me, but it was contained. It was a room I had closed off. The part of me that needed to survive was now in complete control. I knew what he expected to happen next. My next move would have to defy that expectation entirely. The timer, in his mind, had started. In reality, the game had just shifted. He believed he was waiting for my collapse. I was waiting for his mistake. He hummed as he washed the pot, his back to me. The tension that had held his shoulders all through dinner was gone, replaced by a palpable, almost giddy relief. In his mind, the difficult part was over. He had administered the poison. Now he was just waiting, a fisherman watching his line for a tug. He believed I had between 30 minutes to an hour before the symptoms he had researched would begin. He would use that time to solidify his performance of concern. I sat perfectly still at the table. My mind was not still. It was a silent, rapid-fire assessment of variables. The poison was in my digestive system. He believed that. The evidence, the ramekin of tainted herbs, was on the counter. His fingerprints were on it. Mine were on it too from when I sprinkled it. That was a problem for later. My eyes moved from his back to the 2 empty soup bowls on the table. Mine was completely clean. His still had a film of broth at the bottom, a few vegetable bits. The spoons lay askew on the tablecloth. An idea presented itself. It was not a fully formed plan, but an instinct, a physical impulse that bypassed thought. It was the reflex of a mother who had spent a lifetime preventing disasters, snatching a child back from a curb, catching a falling glass. This was the same motion, elevated to a life or death scale. He turned off the water and reached for a dish towel. "I think I'll have a glass of wine," he said, not turning around, "to celebrate my new job prospect. Want one?" "No, thank you," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "Water is fine for me." "Suit yourself." He dried his hands and walked to the refrigerator. He bent down, his head disappearing behind the open door, rummaging in the bottom shelf where he kept his bottles of white wine. This was the moment. The span of time was less than 5 seconds. My body moved before I consciously commanded it. I pushed my chair back silently, the carpet muffling the sound. In 2 swift steps, I was at the table. My left hand picked up his bowl. My right hand picked up mine. In a single smooth crossing motion, I switched their positions. I set the bowls down in their new places with absolute quiet. My spoon was now on the left beside the bowl that had been his. His spoon was on the right beside the bowl that had been mine. I was back in my chair before the refrigerator door swung closed. He emerged with a bottle of Chardonnay. He did not glance at the table. He went to the drawer for the corkscrew. "You sure you don't want any? It's a nice one." "I'm sure," I said. I picked up my glass of water and took a sip. My hand did not shake. I looked at the bowl now in front of me. It was his bowl. It contained the remnants of his clean soup. The bowl in front of his seat was mine, the one laced with the bitter herb. To any casual glance, nothing had changed. The placement of the spoons was the only discrepancy, but it was a minor one, the kind of thing no one would notice unless they were looking for it. He poured his wine, took a long sip, and came to join me at the table. He pulled out his chair and sat down, his gaze drifting over the table. It paused for a fraction of a second on the spoons. A tiny crease appeared between his brows, then vanished. He likely assumed he'd misremembered which side he'd placed his spoon on. It was an insignificant detail buried under the weight of his certainty about the larger fact. He took another drink of wine. "We should have a toast," he said, his tone becoming solemn. He looked at me, his eyes performing sadness. "To family, to everything you've done for me. To family," I echoed softly. I raised my water glass. We touched rims. The crystal ping was a sharp, pure sound in the quiet kitchen. He set his glass down and looked at my face, searching. He was waiting for the first sign, a hand to the chest, a grimace, shortness of breath. I kept my expression neutral, attentive. I could feel a cold sweat start at the base of my spine, but my face remained calm. "You're looking a little pale, Mom," he said, his voice laced with manufactured concern. "Are you feeling okay?" "Just tired," I said. "It was a long day." This was the expected response. He nodded sympathetically. "You work too hard." He reached out and put his hand over mine on the table. His touch was warm, possessive. "You should really relax. Maybe go lie down." "In a little while," I said. I did not pull my hand away, though every nerve screamed to. "I'm enjoying the company." He smiled, a tight, pleased smile. He withdrew his hand and picked up his wine glass again. His eyes flicked to my empty soup bowl, the one he believed was mine, then back to me. The clock in his head was ticking. He took a slow sip, watching me over the rim. I felt a strange, detached clarity. The switch was complete. The trap was now his. He had prepared the poison, served it, and identified the victim. He just did not know the victim's identity had changed. The bitter residue was in the bowl before him. The only question was whether he would consume it. He would. He had to clear the table, to dispose of the evidence. He would not leave a bowl of poison sitting out. He would wash it himself, as he always did. And to wash it, he would have to handle it. He might even take a final spoonful out of habit to finish what was left. It was a small chance, but it was a chance. My own body was my clock. If I had ingested the poison, symptoms would start soon. I monitored myself with clinical detachment. No palpitations, no odd taste returning up my esophagus, no cramping, nothing. The soup in my stomach felt normal. The switch had worked. I was not out of danger. He would become suspicious when I did not collapse. He might realize his error. He might try again, with a different method, more desperate. The confrontation was merely delayed, not avoided. But the battlefield had changed. I was no longer a passive recipient. I had acted. I had taken the weapon he meant for me and placed it within his reach. He finished his wine. "Well," he said, standing, "I should clean up the rest." He reached for his own empty bowl, the clean one, he thought, and his spoon. He picked them up. Then he reached for the bowl in front of my place, the poisoned one. He picked it up. He stacked it inside his own bowl. He collected the spoons. He did not look inside the bowl. He carried the stack to the sink. He turned on the water. He began to wash. He scrubbed the inside of the top bowl, the poisoned one, with a soapy sponge. He rinsed it. He placed it in the drying rack. He washed the lower bowl, his bowl, the clean one. He rinsed it. He placed it in the rack. He washed the spoons. He dried his hands on the towel. He had handled the poison. He had washed it away, but he had not ingested it. The direct threat of him eating from that bowl tonight was gone. The evidence was scrubbed away, down the drain. A forensic test might find traces, but it was unlikely. He had been thorough. He turned, leaning against the counter, a satisfied look on his face. "All done. You should go rest, Mom. Really, you look exhausted." I stood up. My legs were steady. "You're right. I think I will. I walked toward the hallway. I could feel his eyes on my back, watching for a stumble, a wobble. I did not stumble. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and stood in the dark. The first part was over. I had not stopped his plan. I had redirected it. He believed I was a walking dead woman. I knew I had just bought myself a little more time and perhaps created an opportunity. The poison was gone, but his intent was not. He would be confused when I did not die tonight. He would be anxious. He might make a mistake. I had made my first move. It was a small, silent, desperate move, but it was mine. I stood in the dark of my bedroom for a long time, listening. The house was quiet, but it was the quiet of held breath. I heard the faint sounds of him moving in the living room, the creak of the sofa, the low murmur of the television. He was waiting. I was waiting too, but for a different outcome. I monitored my body with detached interest. My heart rate was normal. My breathing was even. No metallic taste, no cramping, no lightheadedness. The soup I had actually eaten sat in my stomach without incident. The poison had gone down the drain with the dishwater. The immediate physical threat had passed. The psychological siege, however, was intensifying. He would be growing confused, then concerned, then suspicious. His plan had a timeline, and I was defying it. I needed to manage his expectations, to guide his suspicions in a direction that would not lead him to realize I had switched the bowls. I needed to act like a woman who was feeling unwell, but not critically so. Not yet. It was a delicate performance. I took a few deliberate, shaky breaths. I splashed cold water on my face at the bathroom sink, letting droplets cling to my skin to mimic sweat. I tousled my hair slightly. Then I opened my bedroom door and walked slowly down the hallway toward the living room. He was on the sofa, pretending to watch a basketball game. His head snapped toward me as I entered. His eyes swept over me, searching, assessing. I saw the flash of confusion, quickly masked. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. His voice was casual, but his posture was rigid. "A little indigestion, I think," I said, allowing a slight wince as I lowered myself into the armchair opposite him. I placed a hand on my abdomen. That soup was rich, my own fault for having a second helping. This was a lie. I had only eaten the one bowl, but it served two purposes. It explained any minor discomfort and reinforced that I had eaten a large quantity of the tainted food. His expression cleared, settling into a look of sympathetic concern. "Oh no. Do you want some Pepto or some tea? I could make ginger tea. That's good for the stomach." "Tea would be nice," I said. "Thank you." He stood up, eager to have a task. "Coming right up." I watched him go to the kitchen. This was a new opportunity. He was alone with the remnants of his plan. I heard the kettle being filled, the click of the stove, then a longer silence. I could picture him standing at the counter, looking at the empty ramekin, thinking. He would be wondering about dosage, about delayed effects. He might be considering a secondary measure. He returned a few minutes later with 2 mugs. "Made one for myself, too," he said, handing me a plain white mug. The steam carried the sharp, clean scent of ginger. "Careful, it's hot." I blew on the surface, watching him over the rim. He sat back on the sofa, cradling his own mug. He took a sip, then set it on the coffee table. He was restless, his fingers drumming on his knee. "You know, Mom," he began, his tone shifting into one of nostalgic solemnity. "Sitting here with you, it just makes me think. About Dad, about us. We're all each other has, really." "That's true," I said softly, taking a small, cautious sip of the tea. It was scalding, but harmless. I was thinking about that toast earlier. To family. He picked up his mug again, holding it aloft. "We should do it properly. A real toast. To everything you've sacrificed. To the future." He was creating a moment. A final, sentimental moment before he expected the crisis to begin. He wanted the last memory between us to be this, a loving toast, so he could replay it for the police, for the neighbors, for himself. "To the future," I echoed. I raised my mug. We did not clink them. The ceramic would chip. We simply held them up in mutual false tribute. He brought his mug to his lips and took a long, deep swallow. He drank as if parched. He set the empty mug down with a definitive thud on the wooden table. I took another tiny sip of mine. It was still too hot to drink quickly. I held it in my hands, letting the warmth seep into my palms. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about that job," he said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "The one out of state. The money is life-changing. But it would mean leaving you here. I've been wrestling with it." "You shouldn't stay on my account," I said. My voice was a whisper. I let it sound frail. "I know you'd say that, but it's a big decision. A fresh start requires resources. Real resources." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "I know Dad's money is tied up. I know the house is yours until... well, sometimes I feel like I'm in limbo, like my whole life is on hold." This was as close as he would come to confessing his motive before the fact. Impatience, entitlement, the belief that his life was being withheld from him by my continued existence. "These things take time, Marcus. The trust is there to protect you, to make sure you're ready." "I am ready," he said, an edge of frustration slipping into his voice. He caught himself, softening his tone. "I just want to make you proud, to build something, and I feel like I can't truly start until..." He trailed off, letting the sentence hang. "Until you're gone." I looked down into my tea. "I understand," I murmured, and I did. I understood completely. A minute passed in silence. Then he shifted on the couch. He cleared his throat, a small, dry cough. He cleared his throat again, more forcefully. "This tea is pungent," he said, but his voice had a new, slight strain. "It's ginger," I said, looking up at him. "It's supposed to be strong." He nodded, but his hand went to his own throat. He swallowed with visible effort. He looked at his empty mug, then at mine, still nearly full. A flicker of something, doubt, alarm, passed behind his eyes. "You should drink yours," he said. "It'll help." "It's still too hot," I said, holding the mug tightly. "I'll wait." He stood up abruptly. "I'm going to get some water." He walked to the kitchen. I heard the faucet run. He was gone for a full minute. When he returned, his face was pale. He did not sit back down. He stood by the sofa, one hand braced on its back. "Mom?" he said. His voice was tighter now. "You're sure you're okay? Just indigestion?" "Just a bit of a stomach ache," I said, watching him carefully. "Are you all right, Marcus? You look pale." "I'm fine," he said quickly, too quickly. He took a deep breath, but it hitched halfway. He pressed his other hand to his chest just below his sternum. A textbook location for the early cardiac symptoms he had researched. His eyes met mine. In that instant, I saw the terrible, dawning comprehension. It did not arrive all at once. It came in waves. First confusion at his own physical distress, then the memory of the empty ramekin by the sink, the washed bowl, the switched spoons, the taste of the soup he had eaten from the wrong bowl. Had there been a faint, bitter note he'd attributed to the herbs? His gaze dropped to my hands, clutching the full, steaming mug of tea. I had not drunk the poison in the soup. I had not drunk the tea quickly. He had. His lips parted. A small, choked sound escaped him, not a word, but a gasp of pure, horrified understanding. He looked from my face to his own empty mug on the table, and the world he had constructed inverted itself. The trap was not mine. It had always been his. But he had just stepped into it. The sound he made was not human. It was the gasp of an animal caught in a snare it had set itself. His hand, still pressed to his chest, clenched into a fist against the fabric of his shirt. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, locked onto mine. In them, I saw the frantic back calculation, the soup, the switch, the tea, the trap. "You," he managed, the word a dry scrape, "you knew." I did not respond. I placed my still full mug of tea on the side table with deliberate care. I remained seated, my hands folded in my lap. I was a spectator now, watching the consequences of his own design unfold. His breathing changed. It became shallow, rapid. He took an unsteady step away from the sofa, as if distance could undo what was happening inside him. His other hand went to his throat again. "It's burning," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "My chest." He looked toward the kitchen, then back at me. The confusion was being burned away by raw, primal fear. He stumbled, catching himself on the arm of the sofa. The movement was clumsy, off balance. His coordination was already slipping. "What did you do?" The question was a demand, but it cracked with panic. I said, my voice flat and calm in the quiet room. "I ate the soup you made. I drank the tea you offered. What did you do, Marcus?" The use of his full name seemed to strike him. He flinched. He tried to draw a full breath and failed, the air catching in a painful-sounding hitch. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead, glistening in the lamplight. The bowl," he stammered, his thoughts clearly fragmenting under the dual assault of poison and terror. "You switched. The bowls." "Did I?" I asked. It was not a confirmation. It was a placeholder, a way to keep him engaged, to keep him in the moment of understanding. I wanted him to comprehend the entirety of it. He took another stumbling step, this time toward the hallway, perhaps aiming for the phone, for help. His leg buckled. He did not fall to the floor, but slumped heavily onto the rug, his back against the wall. He slid down until he was sitting, legs splayed out in front of him. The dignified collapse he had imagined for me was not granted to him. His was graceless, desperate. From my chair, I had a clear view of him. His face was ashen. His pupils were dilated, black pools of fear. He fumbled at his own wrist, pressing 2 fingers to it, checking his pulse. His lips moved, counting silently. The number he found there frightened him more. His hand dropped, limp, to the floor. The silence between us was total, save for his ragged, inefficient breaths. The television still played its game, a cheerful, distant soundtrack to a dying room. His eyes found mine again. The anger was gone, burned away by the physiological crisis. What remained was a childlike, bewildered hurt. "You're just watching," he breathed. "Yes," I said. A tremor ran through him, starting in his hands and moving up his arms. His fingers twitched against the rug. "Call," he tried. "Call 911. I did not move. I continued to look at him, this young man I had nursed through fevers, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose nightmares I had soothed. I saw all those versions of him superimposed on this final, terrible one. The love I felt was a phantom limb, an ache for something that had been amputated 2 days ago when I saw those words on his screen. "Why should I asked. The question was calm, curious. "You didn't plan to call 911 for me. Not in time. You research symptoms that mimic a heart attack. You would have waited. You would have let it be too late. Why is your timeline different?" He stared, uncomprehending for a second. Then the logic, his own cold logic, boomeranged back and struck him. A moan escaped him, part pain, part despair. "Mom, please." The word, the old title, hung in the air. It had no power here anymore. It was a shell. "You should have thought of that word before you chopped those herbs," I said, "before you set that bowl in front of me." He began to cry. Not dramatic sobs, but quiet, helpless tears that tracked through the sweat on his cheeks. The physical distress was merging with the psychological. He was realizing completely that he was alone, that the person who had always been his ultimate safety net was now a witness to his execution, that she had, in fact, handed him the rope. "It's fast," he whispered, his voice weakening. You read it too. It's fast." "I know," I said. I had read about cardiac glycosides, digitalis derivatives perhaps. They could work quickly, especially in a concentrated dose, especially on an empty stomach. He had drunk the tea on an empty stomach, after the wine. He had been eager for his toast. His head lolled back against the wall, his gaze turned inward, tracking the sensations destroying him from within. His hand scrabbled weakly at his chest, as if he could claw the fire out. Hurts. I stood up then. I did not go to him. I walked to the center of the room, stopping where I could see him clearly. I looked down at my son, dying on my living room floor. I felt a vast, hollow, ringing silence where my heart should have been. There was no satisfaction, no victory. There was only the bleak, absolute confirmation of a truth I had not wanted to believe. The spoon had dropped. The performance was over. All that remained was the cleanup and the reasons. But in this frozen moment suspended between his act and my consequence, there was only the sound of his struggling breath and the terrible, quiet understanding in his eyes. He knew I had outmaneuvered him. He knew he was going to die. And he knew, in these last minutes, exactly who was responsible. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, just a strained gasp. His eyes pleaded, but not for mercy anymore, for understanding, perhaps, for an explanation of how this had happened, how he had happened. I provided none. I waited. The next move was his. He had one thing left to do. He had to tell me why. He fought for air, his chest heaving in shallow, useless movements. The words were there, trapped behind the pain and the shock. I knelt on the rug, not close enough to touch him, but close enough to hear the whisper he was straining to produce. The room was very cold, or perhaps that was just my blood. "Why, Marcus?" My voice was low, steady. It was not a plea. It was a demand for the final piece of data. "You need to tell me why." His eyes rolled toward me, glassy with pain and fear. A string of saliva connected his lower lip to his chin. He tried to speak, produced only a wet gurgle. He swallowed convulsively and tried again. "The money." The two words were a harsh exhalation. "The trust fund," I stated. "You couldn't access it all until you were 25, or until my death." A weak, jerky nod. 3 years, and too long. Each phrase was carved out of stone, costing him immense effort. "I have debts. Big. Online. They have pictures. They said they'd—" He trailed off, a spasm seizing his jaw. "Gambling?" I asked. It was the only thing that made sense. The secretive late nights on his computer. The sudden mood swings after checking his phone. The calls from numbers he wouldn't identify. He nodded again, a tear squeezing from the corner of his eye. "Lost everything from Dad. The allowance. More. They said they'd come. Break my knees. Tell you." The confession came in staccato bursts, punctuated by his ragged breathing. The job. Fake. No job. Needed the money to get away. Start over. So it was not just greed. It was fear. Panic. He had painted himself into a corner with his own weakness and saw my death as the only exit. The inheritance wasn't for a future. It was a ransom to pay off his past. "You could have come to me," I said, the words automatic, hollow. Even as I said them, I knew their futility. The son I thought I knew would have come to me. This stranger would not. A bitter, choked sound that might have been a laugh. You'd be disappointed. You'd say, be a man. Fix it yourself." He gasped, his body tensing. "You don't understand pressure. You just manage. You always manage." There it was. The resentment, not for anything I had done, but for what I represented. Stability, patience, the slow, careful way of building a life. He wanted none of it. He wanted the prize without the process. My existence was a reminder of the process and an obstacle to the prize. "The poison," I said. "How did you get it?" "Foxglove," he whispered. "Digitalis. Garden, Mrs. Henderson's. Dried it, crushed it. Looks like parsley. His eyes closed for a long moment. When they opened, they held a terrible clarity. You knew. You saw. I saw the search on your laptop, I confirmed, my voice devoid of accusation. It was a simple fact. He stared at me, the full magnitude of his miscalculation dawning yet again. He had underestimated my observation, my intuition, my will to live. He had thought a mother's love made her blind. He learned now it could also make her ruthless. "I'm sorry," he breathed. The apology was not for the act, I understood, but for the failure, for getting caught, for losing. "No, you're not," I replied calmly. "You're sorry you're dying. You're sorry your plan didn't work. You're not sorry you tried to kill me." He didn't deny it. He couldn't. His silence was the truest confession of all. The pain was eclipsing his capacity for pretense. A violent shudder racked his frame. His head lolled to the side. Cold, so cold. I did not move to get him a blanket. I remained kneeling, a witness. The will, the house, the insurance, it all goes to your next of kin. There is no one else. If you die, it goes to the state, or to distant cousins you've never met. Did you think of that? His eyes widened slightly. He had not. His plan ended with my death. He had not envisioned a world where he predeceased me. The ultimate irony was lost on him now, buried under physical agony. "Call." He tried once more, but the word was a ghost of sound. "Ambulance." I looked at his face, so pale, so young. The little boy was completely gone, erased by the man who chose murder as a solution to his debts. All that remained was a dying animal, confused and scared. "You made a choice, Marcus," I said, my voice finally showing a trace of something, not anger, but a profound, weary finality. "You chose to solve your problem by ending my life. You set the rules. You prepared the weapon. You served the meal." His breathing became more erratic, with longer pauses between each desperate gasp. His fingers, which had been twitching, now lay still on the rug, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, unseeing. I leaned forward slightly. "This is what you researched. This is what you planned for me. Fast acting. Symptoms like a heart attack. Do you understand now?" A single tear traced a path through the sweat on his temple. It was the last coherent response he could give. His chest gave one more shallow rise, then seemed to settle, the frantic struggle easing into a terrifying quiet. His eyes remained open, but the light behind them was gone, replaced by a flat, empty reflection of the ceiling light. The confession was complete. The motive laid bare. Gambling debts, impatience, resentment, and a staggering, childish failure to think beyond the immediate goal. He had wanted the money to escape the consequences of his actions, and I was the logjam in his river. So he decided to remove me. I stayed kneeling for another minute, watching the absolute stillness settle over him. I listened to the silence where his breath had been. I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. The love had been murdered days ago. Now the murderer was gone too. I had my answer. It was petty, sordid, and stupid. My life had been worth less to him than a clean slate from loan sharks. The final humiliation was not the attempt, but the reason for it. It was so small, so unworthy of the cataclysm it had caused. Slowly, I pushed myself up to my feet. My knees ached. The house was silent except for the irrelevant cheer of the television. I looked down at the body of my son. The central conflict of my life was over. I had survived. Now I had to decide what came next. I stood over him, the silence expanding to fill the house. The television was a distant, buzzing nonsense. My own breathing was the only sound that mattered. I looked at my hands. They were clean. They were steady. I looked at the phone on the coffee table, then at the body on the floor. 2 numbers, the same number with 2 different meanings. 911. Option 1. Call an ambulance. Report a medical emergency. My son has collapsed. Possible heart attack. They would come. They would try to resuscitate him. There was a small chance, a very small chance, they could save him. If they did, he would be hospitalized. He would be weak. He would know I had let him die, then changed my mind. He would accuse me of switching the bowls. It would be his word against mine. There was no physical evidence left. The bowls were washed. The ramekin was empty. The digitalis was in his system, but how to prove he didn't take it himself? A messy, chaotic, public battle would follow, a trial. The story of a son trying to kill his mother and the mother who turned the tables. A media spectacle. My privacy, my dignity, shredded. And if he lived, he would be a constant threat. He would try again, or he would sue, or he would poison the rest of my life from a prison cell or a hospital bed. I would have to spend my remaining years looking over my shoulder at the child I raised. Option 2, call the police, report a death, report a suspected suicide or an accidental poisoning, or report the truth, an attempted murder that backfired. That was the cleaner path. It was the final logical step in the sequence he began. He had committed a crime. The consequence of that crime was his death. I would be a witness, a victim who survived. There would be an investigation, but it would be simpler. A dead suspect leaves fewer questions. The narrative would be clearer. A troubled young man, in debt, takes his own life in a tragic accident while experimenting with dangerous substances. Or, if I told the full truth, it would be a clear case of self-defense. A mother acted instinctively to save her own life. The switched bowl was not a premeditated act of revenge. It was a reflexive gesture of survival, made in a split second of terror. That was the story. It had the virtue of being mostly true. I walked to the coffee table and picked up the phone. Its plastic casing was cool and familiar in my hand. I did not sit. I stood in the center of the living room, looking at the scene. My son's body on the floor, the 2 mugs on the table, the quiet, ordinary room that had hosted a murder. I thought of David. What would he have wanted? He would have been shattered. He would have wanted to save his son at any cost. But David was not here. David had not read those search terms. David had not eaten the soup meant for him. I was here. I had. This was not about what Marcus deserved. This was about what I needed. I needed safety. I needed peace. I needed the guarantee that the threat was permanently eliminated. Calling an ambulance offered no guarantees. It offered only prolonged chaos and continued peril. Calling the police offered resolution. It offered an official endpoint. It offered me the chance to be the survivor, not the perpetual victim of a living son. My thumb hovered over the screen. I unlocked it. I tapped the keypad. 9, 1, 1. I paused before pressing the final one. This was the threshold. Once I called, there was no retrieving the body, no altering the story. The machinery of the state would enter my home and take over. I would surrender control. I looked at Marcus one last time. In death, his face had lost its sharpness, its cunning. He looked like a boy again, a tired boy. The ghost of the child he was called to me from across a vast distance. That ghost had no power here. It was a memory, not a presence. The love I felt for that ghost was real. It was also irrelevant. It existed in the past. It could not change the present facts. The present fact was that he had tried to kill me, and in the process, he had killed himself. My role had been reactive. I had not poisoned him. He had poisoned himself. My only action was to not intervene while his own plan consumed him. I pressed the final one. The line connected after one ring. A calm, female voice answered. 911, what is your emergency? I took a breath. My voice, when it came out, was not hysterical. It was measured, clear, laden with a grief that was not fabricated. My name is Anya Johnson. I need to report a death at my home. I believe my son is dead. Okay, ma'am. Can you tell me what happened? I'm not entirely sure. We had dinner. He made soup. He'd been under a lot of stress. Financial stress. He went into the kitchen and then collapsed in the living room. He was clutching his chest. He said it was burning. Then he just stopped breathing. Each sentence was factual. Each omitted the crucial cause. Let them discover it. Is anyone else in the house with you? No, it's just me. Is he breathing at all? Does he have a pulse? No, no pulse. He's cold. This was true now. His skin was cooling under my fingertips when I had checked a moment before calling. Okay, Anya. I'm dispatching police and paramedics to your address now. Stay on the line with me. I will. I sat down on the edge of the armchair. I kept my eyes on his body. I answered the dispatcher's questions about my address, my phone number, my son's age. My voice never wavered. In the distance, I heard the first faint wail of a siren. It grew louder, piercing the suburban quiet. Soon there would be flashing lights in my driveway. Strangers in my living room. Questions, forms. The end of my old life. I had made my choice. I had chosen the path that led away from him and toward my own continued existence. It was a cold choice, a necessary one. As the sirens swelled and became deafening, I felt the coldness settle into my bones, a permanent resident. It was the price of survival. I was willing to pay it. The first pounding on the front door was a shock to the system, though I was expecting it. I opened it to two paramedics in dark uniforms and a police officer, a woman in her 40s with a serious, alert face. Their eyes immediately went past me, scanning the room, landing on Marcus. In here, I said, my voice flat. I stepped aside. The paramedics moved with efficient speed, dropping to their knees beside him. One checked for a pulse at his neck. The other shone a penlight into his fixed pupils. The police officer, whose badge read Detective Ruiz, guided me gently but firmly to the armchair. "Miss Johnson, you're Anya?" she asked. I nodded. "You called it in. Can you tell me what happened?" I repeated the story I had given the dispatcher, my words slow and deliberate. We had dinner. Soup. He'd been very stressed lately. Money problems. He went to the kitchen, then came back and collapsed right there. He said his chest burned. Then he just stopped. I wrapped my arms around myself, a gesture that could be read as shock. It was not entirely an act. One of the paramedics looked up and gave a small, definitive shake of his head to the detective. The official pronouncement. Detective Ruiz's expression softened minutely. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Miss Johnson. I need to ask you some questions. Is that all right?" "Yes," I said. She asked for details. What time did we eat? What did we talk about? Had he seemed depressed? Did he use drugs? I answered truthfully where I could. We ate at 7. We talked about his job prospects, which were poor. He had seemed anxious, not depressed. I had never known him to use drugs, but I was his mother. He could have hidden it. While she spoke to me, another officer arrived. Detective Ruiz directed him to look around. Check the kitchen, see if there's anything unusual. Check his bedroom. My heart rate did not increase. I had already done my own check. The kitchen was clean. The bowls and spoons were in the dishwasher, which I had not run. The ramekin was washed and drying on the rack. There were no visible traces of the green powder. His bedroom contained the real evidence, but it was evidence that supported my narrative. The officer returned from the kitchen. "Nothing out of place, Detective. Seems normal." He then went down the hall to Marcus's room. Detective Ruiz continued her questions. Did he have any history of heart problems? No, his father died of an aneurysm, but that's different. Marcus was young, healthy. Any arguments tonight? Any tension? No arguments, just a sad conversation about the future. He felt stuck. This was also true. The officer emerged from the bedroom holding Marcus's laptop in a gloved hand. "Detective, you might want to see this." It was open on his desk. Ruiz excused herself and went over. She put on gloves and tapped the spacebar. The screen lit up. I knew what she would see. the search history. The tab still open on poisonous plants, digitalis toxicity, symptoms. From their perspective, it would paint a picture of a deeply troubled young man researching self-harm or a dangerous experiment gone wrong. Ruiz's posture changed. She became still, her focus intense. She scrolled. She turned to look at me, then back at the screen. She came back to me, her tone careful, probing but not accusatory. "Ms. Johnson, were you aware your son was researching toxic plants? Foxglove, digitalis?" I allowed my eyes to widen. I let a genuine tremor enter my voice. No, I had no idea. He liked gardening sometimes, with the neighbor, but toxic plants? I looked toward his body, a new layer of horror dawning on my face. It was easy to summon. The horror was real, only its context was shifted. "It appears he was looking into it quite thoroughly," Ruiz said gently. "This might indicate he was considering harming himself. Or it could have been an accident. He might have ingested something he shouldn't have." I put my face in my hands. I didn't have to pretend to cry. The tears came, silent and hot. They were for the totality of it, for the boy he was, for the monster he became, for the sheer, stupid waste of it all. To the detectives, it looked like a mother learning her son may have killed himself. "I need to ask a difficult question," Ruiz said after a moment. "Is there any possibility someone else was involved? Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt him?" I lifted my head, wiping my cheeks. "No one. He was in debt, I think. He mentioned owing money. But enemies? No." I was giving them the motive for suicide, not murder. The digitalis search on his computer, combined with debt, pointed squarely to self-infliction. The medical examiner's team arrived. The living room became a controlled chaos of people in uniform taking photographs, bagging the 2 mugs as a precaution, speaking in low tones. They covered Marcus with a sheet and eventually placed him on a gurney. The zip of the body bag was a sound I will never forget. It was a harsh, final whisper. Detective Ruiz handed me her card. "The medical examiner will determine the cause of death. It will take a few days. We'll be in touch. Is there someone you can call to stay with you tonight?" "I have a sister," I said. It was true. I would not call her tonight, but I could if I needed to. "Please do. Don't be alone." She gave my shoulder a brief, professional squeeze. "I'm very sorry." They filed out, one by one. The flashing lights from the driveway disappeared. The engine sounds faded. I locked the front door. The house was not quiet. It was empty. The difference was profound. The silence was no longer charged with threat. It was hollow, vast, and mine. I went directly to the kitchen. I turned on the overhead light, too bright. I opened the dishwasher. I removed the 2 soup bowls and the 2 spoons. I took the ramekin from the drying rack. I filled the sink with the hottest water I could stand and added a strong splash of bleach. I scrubbed each item again, methodically, then rinsed them and placed them back in the cabinets. I wiped down the counters, the stove, the table. I emptied the kitchen trash bag, tying it off and taking it to the outside bin. I was not erasing a crime. I was cleaning my kitchen after a meal. The evidence they might look for, residue in the bowls, was gone, washed away first by Marcus, then by me. Any trace would be meaningless, expected in dishes that held food. When the kitchen was spotless, I turned off the light. I walked through the living room. The rug where he had fallen showed no stain, no mark. The room was orderly. It looked as it always did, except for the profound absence at its center. I did not go to my bedroom. I sat on the sofa in the spot he had vacated. The television was off. I watched the first pale hints of dawn begin to lighten the edges of the window blinds. The night was over. The immediate aftermath was handled. The story was set in motion, a tragic, impulsive act by a desperate young man. My performance was complete. The authorities had believed me, or at least they had found nothing to disbelieve. The next steps would be bureaucratic. An autopsy, a death certificate, a funeral. I felt no triumph, only a deep, bone-level fatigue and the cold, clear knowledge that I had done what was necessary to survive. The house was quiet. It was safe. It was mine again. And I was alone in it. The gray light through the blinds hardened into a clear, pale yellow. I stood from the sofa, my joints stiff from stillness. The house was clean. The silence was complete. I made coffee, the routine anchoring me to the morning. The pot hissed and gurgled, a normal sound in an abnormal world. I took my mug to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp grass and blooming lilacs from the neighbor's yard. A bird sang from a telephone wire. Down the street, I heard the faint sound of a garage door opening. The world was proceeding with its ordinary business. I sat in the wicker chair, the one David had liked for his evening reading. The cushion was faded from sun. I held the warm mug between my palms and watched the street come to life. A jogger passed by, giving a slight wave. A car backed slowly out of a driveway. The sky shifted from pink to a soft, cloudless blue. It was a beautiful morning. The irony was not lost on me. My mind was not empty, but it was quiet. The frantic calculations, the hypervigilance, the parsing of every word and glance, all that had ceased. In its place was a flat, featureless landscape of facts. Marcus was gone. I was here. He had tried to kill me. He had failed. The investigation would likely conclude suicide or accidental poisoning. I would plan a funeral. I would notify relatives. I would continue to live in this house. There was no relief in these facts. There was only acceptance. After a while, I went back inside. I walked to the small bookcase in the living room where we kept photo albums and framed pictures. There was one of the three of us taken on a beach vacation when Marcus was about 10. David had his arm around me, smiling broadly. Marcus was between us, squinting at the sun, a half grin on his face. We looked happy. We had been happy in that moment. It was a true thing, even if it was not the whole truth. I took the frame from the shelf. The glass was dusty. I carried it back to the porch and sat down again. I looked at the faces, frozen in a time before debt, before desperation, before poison. I looked at my own younger face, at the ease in my smile that I could no longer remember feeling. I did not cry. The grief was a dry, heavy stone inside my chest. It was not the sharp, tearing pain of fresh loss. It was the settled weight of something monumental and irreversible. My fingers found the metal clips on the back of the frame. I pressed them, released the backing, and lifted the cardboard away. The photograph was a standard 5x7, glossy, slightly curled at the edges. I slid it out. I held it for a long minute, feeling the slight texture of the paper. Then I let it go. I didn't throw it. I simply opened my fingers. The photograph fluttered, caught a tiny current of air, and landed face up on the porch floorboards by my feet. It looked like something discarded, unimportant. The images of my husband and my son and my former self stared up at the sky. I would not destroy it, but I would not display it again. It belonged to a story that was over. That was. A different story had begun, written in the quiet of a hallway and the steam of a soup bowl and the final understanding silence on my living room floor. I finished my coffee. I stood up. I left the photograph where it lay. I went inside, leaving the front door open to let in the morning air. The phone rang later that afternoon. It was Detective Ruiz. Her voice was professionally sympathetic. "Ms. Johnson, I have a preliminary update. The medical examiner's initial findings are consistent with digitalis toxicity. They found traces in his system. Combined with the computer search history, they are leaning heavily toward a conclusion of self-ingestion, either intentional or accidental. There will be a formal report in a few days, but I wanted to give you a heads up. It looks like it was his own actions." "I see," I said. "Thank you for telling me." Do you have any questions? No, no questions. We hung up. The official story was solidifying. It was the story I had allowed to form. It was clean. It was believable. It protected me. In the days that followed, I handled the necessary tasks. I called my sister. Her shock was genuine, her sobs loud over the phone. I listened, gave brief, vague answers about his stress and depression. I called a funeral home and made arrangements for a small private service. I went through Marcus's room, boxing up his clothes for donation, sorting his belongings into keep and discard piles. I found printed statements from online gambling sites showing staggering losses. I shredded them. The debt died with him. The house felt different. It was no longer a battlefield, but neither was it a home. It was a structure where I resided. I could change it. I could sell it. I could stay. The choice was entirely mine, unencumbered by anyone else's plans for it. A week after that morning on the porch, I was in the kitchen making tea. The evening news was on in the living room, a low murmur. I heard the back gate click. I turned. Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, was coming up the path, carrying a small basket. She had a kind, wrinkled face and a vibrant garden. Marcus had sometimes helped her with heavy lifting. I met her at the back door. "Anya, dear," she said, her eyes full of sorrow. "I just heard. I'm so terribly sorry about Marcus." She held out the basket. It contained a jar of honey and a small potted plant with drooping, bell-shaped purple flowers. "I thought you might like this. It's a peace offering for my garden being so messy lately. Some of my foxglove went to seed and sprouted everywhere. I've been pulling it up for weeks. Nasty, poisonous stuff. Marcus even helped me clear some of it out a while back. I should have been more careful." I took the basket. My hands did not falter. "Thank you, Eleanor. That's very kind. If you need anything at all, you let me know." "I will." She patted my arm and left. I placed the basket on the counter. I looked at the purple flowers, so delicate and pretty. Foxglove. Digitalis purpurea. The source. He had helped her pull it up. He had kept some, dried it, crushed it. The final, mundane origin of the poison. I carried the pot outside to the trash bin. I did not keep it. I returned to the kitchen, washed my hands, and finished making my tea. I took the tea to the porch. It was evening again, the sky turning a deeper blue. I sat in the same chair. The photograph was no longer on the floorboards. I had placed it inside a drawer days ago. I looked out at the street, at the windows glowing warmly in other houses. Families were having dinner, watching television, arguing, laughing. Lives were intersecting, affecting each other in ways seen and unseen. My own life was singular now, a straight, quiet line stretching forward. I felt the loss, profound and permanent. I felt the guilt, too, not for his death, but for the failure that preceded it, the failure to see the rod in time, to steer him differently. That guilt was mine to carry. It was a lighter burden than the coffin would have been, but beneath the loss and the guilt, there was a solid, unshakable foundation. It was the knowledge that I had looked into the abyss of my own child's hatred, and I had not fallen in. I had made choices, hard, terrible choices. I had chosen to see. I had chosen to act. I had chosen to survive. The vengeance was not in his death. The vengeance was in my continued life, in my breath on this porch, in my hands around this warm mug, in the unbroken line of my tomorrows, which he had tried to sever. I sipped my tea. The air was sweet with lilac. I would sleep tonight. I would wake tomorrow. The story was over. My life was not. I was here. I was alive. And that was enough.